At the dawn of the 19th century, the United States was still young, its frontier lands stretching outward into wilderness and mystery. In Tennessee, farmlands spread across rolling hills, rivers cut through forests, and families struggled to carve out lives in a world that felt untamed. Among those families were the Bells, hard-working settlers of Robertson County, whose legacy would be forever marked by one of the most terrifying hauntings in American history. What began as simple disturbances would grow into a legend of violence, whispers, and death. A story passed down for generations as the Bell Witch haunting. John Bell, the patriarch of the family, had moved with his wife Lucy and their children from North Carolina to Tennessee in the early 1800s. They settled near the Red River, where fertile soil promised good harvests and where they could build a home of stability. By all accounts, John was prosperous, a man respected by neighbors, and Lucy was known for her kindness and devotion. Together, they raised a large family in a modest but comfortable log house surrounded by fields and woods. For years, life seemed peaceful, but in 1817, the quiet harmony of the Bell household shattered. It began subtly, almost innocently. Strange noises echoed across their land at night, scratching, tapping, faint whispers carried on the wind. The family dismissed them as animals rustling in the brush or the creaking of wood in the house. But soon the sounds grew louder, sharper, impossible to ignore. They heard knocking on doors and walls, heavy footsteps pacing across empty rooms, the sound of gnawing at bedposts when no rodents could be found. At night, John Bell and his children lay awake, listening to the relentless disturbances that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Then came the sightings. John reported seeing a strange animal lurking at the edge of his fields. It was described as having the body of a dog, but the head of a rabbit, a grotesque combination that vanished whenever approached. The children claimed to see birds of unnatural size perched on fences, or shadowy figures slipping between trees only to disappear into thin air. At first, the family spoke little of it, fearful of ridicule, but soon the experiences became too overwhelming to keep private. The disturbances escalated quickly. Bedding was pulled violently from the children's beds as they slept. Hair was tugged, skin pinched by unseen hands. Most of the attacks focused on young Betsy Bell, John's daughter, who was still a child at the time. She awoke screaming as invisible hands slapped her face, leaving red marks that her parents could not explain. Her hair was pulled so violently that clumps were left tangled in the sheets. She cried of voices whispering her name in the dark, mocking her, promising torment. The Bells prayed fervently, asking God for protection, but the disturbances did not cease. Instead, the entity seemed to grow stronger, feeding off the family's fear. Its noises became words, first incoherent mutters and then full sentences spoken in a harsh, rasping voice. The family began to hear it clearly in their rooms, a voice that mocked them, cursed them, and claimed to be a spirit with power over their lives. It laughed at their prayers, repeating the verses back to them in twisted tones. Terrified, the Bells confided in their neighbors. To their shock, the phenomena did not hide itself from outsiders. Visitors to the Bell home heard the knocking, the footsteps, the disembodied voice. Some claimed to be slapped or pinched themselves. Word spread quickly through Robertson County, and soon the Bell home was no longer just a private residence but a gathering place for those curious or foolish enough to witness the haunting. Neighbors gathered by candlelight, sitting silently in the Bell's parlor, only to hear the voice speak out of the darkness, insulting them by name or laughing cruelly at their fear. As the months passed, the entity revealed more of its personality. It called itself a witch, though whether it was the spirit of a dead woman, a demon, or something else entirely was unclear. Some said it was the ghost of a woman named Kate Batts, a neighbor who had once quarreled with John Bell over land and who, according to rumor, swore she would haunt him. The entity itself embraced the name Kate, often declaring that she was determined to kill John Bell. Others believed it was something older, darker, a spirit of malevolence that had chosen the family for reasons no one could explain. The Bell Witch was not shy. Unlike many hauntings, which hide in shadows and secrecy, this entity craved attention. It spoke loudly, laughed, sang hymns mockingly, and even held conversations with visitors. It imitated voices, repeated sermons it had overheard in distant churches, and recited details it could not possibly know. Many came to the Bell home simply to hear it for themselves, and the witch rarely disappointed. Some nights the voice chattered endlessly, taunting and threatening, while other nights it was silent, leaving only the dread of its presence. But though the witch entertained neighbors and fascinated the curious, it remained brutal toward the Bell family. Betsy continued to suffer the worst, often collapsing from exhaustion after nights of torment. She was beaten, scratched, and humiliated by the entity that seemed to delight in her pain. Her cries of terror became part of the nightly soundscape of the household, a constant reminder that this was no trick of the imagination, but a force capable of causing real harm. John Bell himself began to weaken under the strain. Once a strong and respected man, he grew haggard and fearful. He suffered mysterious illnesses, tremors, choking sensations, paralysis of the jaw, that doctors could not explain. Whenever he struggled, the witch's voice mocked him, promising his death. "Old Jack Bell," it rasped, "you will die, and I will be there when you do." The family feared it was not just torment, but a curse that had marked John for destruction. The haunting had escalated from whispers in the night to a campaign of terror against an entire family. And it was only beginning. The voice would grow louder, the violence more brutal, the prophecy of John Bell's death more insistent. What the Bells had thought was a simple nuisance was revealed as something intelligent, malicious, and determined. The Bell Witch had arrived, and she was not going to leave. The Bell family could no longer deny what was happening within their home. By 1818, the strange noises and unsettling whispers had become a full assault, a campaign of terror that left the family exhausted, frightened, and broken. Neighbors who once laughed at the Bells now admitted their own fear, for when they entered the Bell home, they too were subjected to the presence of the witch. The haunting was no longer confined to the family. It had become a phenomenon that spread through the entire community, gripping Robertson County with a mixture of fascination and dread. The torment was worst for young Betsy Bell. Barely into her teenage years, she became the prime target of the entity's wrath. At night, her screams echoed through the house as unseen hands yanked her hair, slapped her face, and scratched her skin until it bled. She often woke to find the sheets ripped from her bed, her body bruised and battered as though she had been in a fight with an invisible attacker. The witch mocked her mercilessly, calling her names, laughing at her tears, and warning her that she would never know peace. During the day, Betsy's torment did not cease. When she tried to focus on her studies, the witch whispered in her ear, disrupting her thoughts. When she attempted to court a young man named Joshua Gardner, the entity roared in fury, declaring that Betsy would never marry him, that it would see to it that their union never happened. Every attempt at a normal life was poisoned by the malicious spirit, and soon Betsy became pale, withdrawn, and haunted. Her youth stolen by an unseen predator, John Bell, too bore the brunt of the witch's attacks. His health declined steadily under the strain. The once strong patriarch began to suffer mysterious fits. At times his jaw locked tight, leaving him unable to speak or eat. Other times he collapsed without warning, his body trembling violently as though poisoned. Doctors were baffled, unable to diagnose his afflictions. Yet whenever John suffered, the witch was there, her voice triumphant, taunting him with promises of his death. "Old Jack Bell," she hissed, "you are mine. You will not escape me." The rest of the Bell family endured constant fear. Lucy Bell, the matriarch, was spared much of the direct violence, but she too was tormented by the endless disturbances. Food was snatched from her hands, hidden objects reappeared in impossible places, and the mocking voice often repeated her private prayers back to her, twisting them into insults. The younger children cried at night, unable to sleep in the house that had become a prison. No one was safe. Neighbors and friends began to gather nightly at the Bell home, drawn partly by sympathy and partly by morbid curiosity. Dozens of witnesses sat in the parlor, listening in stunned silence as the witch spoke aloud, her voice sometimes low and guttural, other times high and shrill. She carried on conversations, argued theology with ministers, and even sang hymns from start to finish with chilling clarity. Those who doubted the Bell's stories often left believers, shaken by the power of the unseen voice. One of the most disturbing aspects of the Bell Witch was her knowledge. She seemed to know the private details of those who visited. She repeated conversations held miles away, mimicked voices of the living and the dead, and even predicted future events with alarming accuracy. When neighbors traveled long distances, The witch recounted their journeys as if she had been with them, watching every step. Ministers who sought to confront her were humiliated, their sermons mocked and repeated back to them with perfect precision. She seemed to know everything, and she used that knowledge to deepen her hold over the terrified community. Despite the torment, there were moments when the witch showed strange kindness. She often expressed affection for Lucy Bell, bringing her fruit or singing hymns to comfort her. Some claimed this favoritism was evidence that the spirit was truly human, perhaps the ghost of a woman who respected Lucy but despised John. Others believed it was a trick, a way of manipulating the family by dividing kindness and cruelty. Whatever the reason, Lucy remained the only member of the household who was not subjected to the worst of the witch's wrath. As the haunting escalated, visitors of increasing prominence came to witness the events. Local leaders, clergymen, and curious strangers all made their way to the Bell farm. They heard the voice for themselves, felt the invisible hands tugging at their clothes, and saw objects move across rooms without explanation. The haunting of the Bell family was no longer a private nightmare. It was becoming a public spectacle, one that would soon capture the attention of the entire region. The witch's obsession with John Bell only deepened. She often declared that she intended to kill him, that she would not rest until his life was taken. At meals, John struggled to eat, his jaw seizing shut as the witch laughed. His once vigorous body grew frail, his eyes sunken with exhaustion. Friends whispered that the patriarch was cursed, that his days were numbered. The witch herself gloated openly, repeating her prophecy, "He will die by my hand." The atmosphere in the Bell home grew unbearable. By nightfall, the family dreaded sleep, knowing the witch would come with her cruel tricks and violent assaults. By day, they braced for ridicule, for the voice that mocked their every move. Fear clung to them like a shadow, and even the neighbors who came to witness the haunting began to withdraw, unwilling to face the entity too often. The Bells were left isolated, prisoners within their own walls, bound not by locks and chains, but by the constant presence of something they could neither see nor escape. By the early 1820s, the Bell Witch had become the most feared legend in Tennessee. Songs were sung of her, stories whispered in taverns and around campfires. Some said she was the spirit of Kate Batts, exacting revenge from beyond the grave. Others believed she was a demon, a manifestation of evil itself. Whatever she was relentless, intelligent, and merciless in her persecution, and her campaign of terror was far from finished. The worst was yet to come, for soon the witch would not only torment and threaten, she would act, and when she did, her actions would seal her place in history forever. By the early 1820s, the Bell Witch had ceased to be a mere tormentor of a single family. She had become a phenomenon, a voice that echoed not only in the Bell household but across all of Robertson County and beyond. What had begun as scratching on the walls and whispers in the dark now evolved into full conversations with visitors, arguments with ministers, debates with skeptics, and even the singing of hymns. The witch no longer hid in shadows. She reveled in her fame, boasting of her powers, mocking those who doubted her, and tightening her grip on the Bell family with every word. Night after night, people gathered in the modest Bell cabin to hear the disembodied voice. Sometimes it was coarse and guttural, other times shrill and mocking, and on occasion it sounded eerily like members of the community, imitating them with cruel accuracy. The voice seemed to know things it should not, intimate details of private lives, secrets whispered in confidence, events that happened miles away. The witch repeated conversations from distant farms, exposed affairs, and ridiculed men for their hidden sins. No one could explain how she knew these things, and this knowledge gave her a terrible authority. People began to fear her not only for her violence, but for what she might reveal. Clergymen were especially drawn to the Bell home, determined to confront the spirit and test her powers. Ministers who tried to preach found their sermons mocked, word for word, before they could finish. Passages of scripture were repeated back in distorted tones, twisted into blasphemy. One minister who tried to exorcise the house was laughed at as the witch recited his own prayers back to him with more precision than he had managed himself. Some preachers left humiliated, others shaken, admitting they had no power against whatever force inhabited the place. The witch often displayed a cruel sense of humor. She would sing loudly in the middle of the night, keeping the family awake with hymns or drunken tavern songs. She sometimes mimicked the crying of infants or the mewing of cats, filling the house with unsettling noises that went on for hours. On other nights, she told long, rambling stories, some of which were accurate accounts of local history, others bizarre and nonsensical tales. Listeners were never sure when she was lying or telling the truth, and perhaps that was the point. She thrived on confusion, on control, on the fear that her audience would never know what to expect. Despite her cruelty, the witch continued to show an odd fondness for Lucy Bell. While John and Betsy endured her wrath, Lucy was treated with strange respect. The voice would sometimes comfort her, promising protection or praising her virtue. On one occasion, Lucy fell ill, and the witch declared she would nurse her back to health. To the family's astonishment, Lucy did recover quickly, and the witch took credit, boasting that she could both destroy and heal. This twisted favoritism only deepened the mystery of the haunting. Was the entity truly a vengeful spirit of a wronged woman, or was it a darker force toying with its victims? The most unsettling development was the witch's ability to predict future events. She announced marriages that later came to pass, foretold visitors who arrived exactly as described, and even predicted the outcome of battles during the War of 1812. When General Andrew Jackson, future President of the United States, heard of the haunting, he allegedly traveled to the Bell farm with his men to witness it for himself. According to legend, as soon as they approached, their wagon stopped suddenly, refusing to move. Horses strained, wheels creaked, but the vehicle would not budge. Jackson reportedly exclaimed, "By the eternal boys, it is the witch!" After a night filled with unsettling events in the Bell cabin, the general and his men departed. Unwilling to test their luck further, the Bell witch became a kind of celebrity, drawing visitors from distant towns and even other states. The Bell household, once a place of terror and exhaustion, became a spectacle, its torments transformed into a grim theater of the supernatural. People wanted to hear the voice for themselves, to test their courage, to confront the unknown. And the witch rarely disappointed. She seemed to grow stronger with every audience, feeding on attention, thriving on fear. But for the Bell family, fame was no blessing. The nightly assaults continued with relentless cruelty. Betsy remained the witch's favorite victim, slapped, scratched, and pinched until she was too weak to rise. Her engagement to Joshua Gardner, a young man from the community, was tormented by the spirit's fury. Whenever the couple met, the witch intruded, shrieking in their ears, mocking their affection, and swearing that Betsy would never marry him. The pressure became unbearable, and eventually Betsy broke off the engagement, heartbroken, convinced that no love could withstand the wrath of the witch. John Bell's decline grew worse. His mysterious illness advanced until he could barely function. He staggered through his days, his face pale, his body frail, his speech slurred by the choking fits that plagued him. Whenever he collapsed, the witch gloated, shouting triumphantly that his end was near. She seemed fixated on his death, promising it again and again, savoring the slow destruction of the man she had chosen as her enemy. The community debated endlessly about what the Bell witch truly was. Some believed she was the spirit of Kate Batts, a neighbor who had once quarreled with John Bell over a land deal, and who was rumored to have practiced witchcraft. Others dismissed that as superstition, convinced instead that she was a demon, an inhuman force bent on destruction. Still others thought she was a manifestation of the Bell family's sins or secrets, a psychological haunting given voice and power by their fears. Yet no theory could explain the precision of her knowledge, the violence of her attacks, or the clarity of her voice. By the mid-1820s, the haunting had reached its peak. The Bell family lived under constant siege, their nights filled with torment, their days overshadowed by dread. Visitors continued to come, but their curiosity offered no relief. The witch was stronger than ever, louder than ever, more malicious than ever, and she was not finished. She had promised John Bell's death, and soon she would keep that promise. By the late 1820s, the Bell family was utterly broken. Years of torment had stripped them of peace, health, and stability. The witch's laughter echoed through their home, her cruel games never ceasing. For John Bell, the patriarch, the weight was unbearable. His body wasted away under mysterious illnesses, his speech slurred, his strength drained. He stumbled through his final months as a shadow of the man he once had been, tormented not only by physical suffering, but by the constant, mocking voice that haunted his every step. The witch had chosen her enemy, and she was determined to claim his life. In December of 1820, John Bell's condition worsened drastically. His family found him bedridden, unable to rise, his breathing shallow, his body trembling. Beside his bed, they discovered a vial of strange black liquid, a substance no one recognized. When questioned, the witch laughed with glee and declared, "It is mine. I gave old Jack Bell a dose last night, and he will never rise again." Terrified, the family tested the liquid on a cat, which died instantly. Convinced the witch had poisoned him, they realized there was nothing they could do. John Bell's fate was sealed. On December 20th, 1820, John Bell died. He had fought against the witch's torment for years, but in the end, her prophecy had come true. As the family mourned, the voice of the witch filled the house, laughing triumphantly, celebrating the death she had promised. "Old Jack is gone," she shrieked. "I fixed him." Neighbors who gathered for the funeral claimed to hear her mocking voice during the service, singing loudly and obscenely, drowning out the prayers meant to honor the dead. It was as though she would not allow even his burial to bring peace. John Bell's death marked the climax of the haunting, but it did not end it. Betsy Bell, still plagued by torment, found her life dominated by the witch's interference. Her engagement to Joshua Gardner had already been destroyed, the spirit ensuring that she would never marry the man she loved. Eventually, Betsy married another suitor, but she carried the scars of her youth forever. Haunted by the years of abuse she suffered at the hands of an invisible force. After John Bell's death, the witch's activity lessened, but she did not vanish. For months afterward, she continued to speak, boasting of her victory, taunting the family and mocking their grief. Then, just as suddenly as she had arrived, she announced she would leave. In 1821, the witch declared she was departing, but promised she would return in 7 years. And true to her word, in 1828 she returned briefly, appearing in the Bell home once again. This time, her voice was calmer, more philosophical, discussing matters of faith, life, and destiny with John Bell Jr. After a short period, she vanished once more, promising she would return again in 107 years. Whether she kept that promise is uncertain. Some claim she reappeared in 1935, haunting descendants of the Bell family, though no evidence was as strong as the original events of the early 19th century. What is undeniable, however, is that the legend of the Bell Witch never died. The Bell Witch story spread far beyond Robertson County. It was told in taverns, in churches, and in newspapers, becoming one of the earliest and most detailed accounts of a haunting in American history. The sheer number of witnesses, from neighbors to ministers to General Andrew Jackson himself, gave the story credibility that few ghost tales could match. Unlike many legends confined to whispers and family lore, the Bell Witch was recorded, retold, and remembered. To this day, the Bell Witch remains one of the most famous hauntings in the United States. The site of the Bell Farm became a place of pilgrimage for those fascinated by the story. Near the old homestead lies the infamous Bell Witch Cave, a dark cavern said to be a hiding place of the spirit. Visitors report strange occurrences there, disembodied voices, cold winds, and apparitions moving in the shadows. Some claim to hear the witch herself, laughing deep in the darkness of the cave. The land, once fertile and promising, is now marked forever by its sinister past. The legacy of the Bell Witch is more than folklore. It is a story that has endured for over 2 centuries, woven into the identity of Tennessee and American supernatural history. It has inspired books, plays, and films, capturing the imagination of each new generation. Skeptics argue it was mass hysteria, the product of fear and rumor, perhaps even deliberate trickery. But believers point to the sheer volume of testimony, the consistency of the accounts, and the terrifying accuracy of the witch's prophecies. What makes the Bell Witch legend so powerful is not just the violence or the death of John Bell, but the voice. Unlike so many hauntings, where the dead speak in whispers or vague signs, the Bell Witch spoke clearly, boldly, undeniably. She argued, she sang, she mocked, she threatened. She was not a shadow in the corner of the eye. She was a presence that demanded acknowledgement. And she achieved it. For the Bell family, the haunting was a tragedy. For the community, it was a mystery. For history, it is a legend that refuses to die. Even now, visitors to the Bell Witch Cave or to the land where the family once lived report strange sensations. A sense of being watched, whispers in the wind, the sound of laughter where no one stands. Whether the witch still lingers or whether her memory alone fuels the fear, the effect is the same. The Bell Witch is alive in the minds of those who dare to speak her name. 200 years later, her laughter still echoes. It is the laughter of a spirit that defied explanation, that mocked the living, that claimed the death of a man and the soul of a family. The Bell Witch may have promised to return, but perhaps she never left. Perhaps she remains in the soil of Tennessee, in the shadows of the cave, in the dark corners of history, waiting for those foolish enough to doubt her, and so the story endures. The tale of the Bell Witch, the most infamous haunting in American history. The witch who spoke, who cursed, who killed. Her voice is gone from the Bell home, but her legend remains, whispered in the night, carried by the wind, reminding us that some spirits are too powerful to fade,